It was a sweltering afternoon in July when Dr. Rajesh Kumar heard the sound that would forever change his understanding of wild animals and the mysterious bonds that can form between species that should, by all logic, remain eternally separate. The wildlife veterinarian had been working at the small conservation clinic on the edge of Ranthambore National Park in Rajasthan, India, for 8 years, treating injured animals, monitoring endangered species, and doing his part to preserve the delicate balance between human civilization and the wild tigers and leopards that still roamed the ancient forests. But nothing in his training or experience had prepared him for what was about to walk through his gate. Before I tell you this absolutely incredible true story that went viral around the world and made millions of people cry, I need you to do something for me right now. Leave a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching this video from, because I love knowing where my viewers are from, and it helps me create content that reaches people all over the globe. And while you're down there in the comment section, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story like this one. And go ahead and smash that like button, because I guarantee this story is going to move you in ways you never expected. This is one of those rare tales that reminds us why the natural world is so precious and why we need to protect it. So stay with me through every moment of this journey, because what happens is absolutely extraordinary, and you won't want to miss a single detail. Rajesh was a man of 45, with gentle dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, prematurely gray hair that he attributed to the stress of his chosen profession, and hands that bore the scars of countless animal encounters, some peaceful and some decidedly not. He had grown up in a small village near the park, the son of a farmer who had lost several goats and once a young calf to leopard attacks, but unlike many in his community who viewed these big cats as threats to be eliminated, Rajesh had been fascinated by them from childhood, spending hours reading whatever books he could find about their behavior, their hunting strategies, their crucial role in maintaining healthy ecosystems by controlling prey populations. This passion had driven him through veterinary school in Delhi, through additional specialized training in wildlife medicine, and eventually back to his home region where he could dedicate his life to protecting the very animals that his neighbors often feared and resented. His clinic was modest, just a few rooms in a concrete building with basic medical equipment, holding cages for injured animals awaiting release, and a small apartment upstairs where he lived alone, having never married, his work consuming all the time and energy that might otherwise have gone into family life. On this particular July afternoon, Rajesh had been treating a young sambar deer that had been hit by a tourist's vehicle on one of the roads that cut through the park, a constant source of wildlife casualties that frustrated him deeply because they were so preventable if only people would drive more carefully and respect the fact that they were traveling through someone else's home. The deer's leg was broken but not beyond repair, and Rajesh had just finished setting the bone and administering pain medication when he heard his assistant Priya call out from the front of the clinic, her voice carrying an unusual note of urgency mixed with what sounded like fear. Rajesh quickly washed his hands and hurried to see what had caused such alarm, expecting perhaps an injured tiger. They occasionally received big cats that had been hurt in territorial fights or caught in illegal snares, or maybe a villager who had been bitten by a snake or attacked by a wild boar. These were all regular occurrences in this area, where humans and wildlife lived in uneasy proximity. What he found when he reached the front courtyard of his clinic made him stop in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat, because standing there in the harsh afternoon sunlight, not 15 meters from where Priya stood frozen against the wall, was a fully grown female leopard, and this magnificent creature was doing something that defied every known behavior pattern of her species, something that suggested a level of trust and intelligence that most wildlife experts would have declared impossible. The leopard was heavily pregnant, her belly swollen with cubs that would likely be born within days, and rather than being in a secure den hidden deep in the forest as any pregnant leopard should be, rather than being as far from humans as possible during this most vulnerable time, she was here, in Rajesh's courtyard, and her body language suggested not aggression or fear, but something that looked remarkably like supplication, like a conscious decision to seek help from the one creature that leopards had learned over millennia to avoid at all costs. Rajesh slowly raised his hand to signal Priya to remain absolutely still and silent, his eyes never leaving the leopard as his mind raced through possible explanations for this unprecedented situation. The leopard was breathing heavily. Her golden coat with its distinctive rosette patterns was dusty and showed signs of struggle, and as Rajesh observed her more carefully, he noticed that her left front leg was held at an awkward angle and she was avoiding putting full weight on it, suggesting an injury that was probably preventing her from hunting properly, and definitely would make it impossible for her to climb trees, a crucial ability for leopards who cached their kills in branches to protect them from scavenging tigers and hyenas. But it was her eyes that truly captured Rajesh's attention, those amber gold eyes that met his directly. Something prey animals almost never do because direct eye contact is a sign of challenge or aggression. Yet this leopard was holding his gaze with an intensity that seemed almost human in its clarity of purpose and desperation. She made a sound, a soft chuffing vocalization that mother leopards use to communicate with their cubs, and then, in a moment that Rajesh would replay in his mind thousands of times in the years to come, she took 3 deliberate steps forward, closer to him, closing the distance between wild predator and human in a gesture that was unmistakably intentional. Every instinct Rajesh had developed over his years working with dangerous animals told him to back away slowly, to get inside, and call forest department officials with tranquilizer guns to treat this as the emergency situation it clearly was. A desperate and injured predator capable of killing a human in seconds if she felt threatened or decided he was prey. But something stronger than instinct held him in place, some recognition that what was happening here was not an attack or even an accident but a choice, that this leopard had come to his clinic deliberately and was asking for help in the only way she knew how, by making herself vulnerable and trusting that the human before her would understand and respond with compassion rather than aggression. Rajesh spoke softly, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system, saying gentle words in Hindi, more for his own benefit than the leopard's, though later he would swear that she seemed to respond to his tone if not his actual words. He slowly lowered himself to sit on the ground, making himself smaller and less threatening, a gesture that went against all safety protocols but felt absolutely necessary in this moment of impossible connection. The leopard watched him sit, her ears forward in an alert but not aggressive posture, and then she did something even more extraordinary. She lowered herself to the ground as well, lying down in a sphinx-like position that kept her ready to spring up if needed, but also communicated a willingness to be temporarily vulnerable, and she extended her injured front leg toward him as clearly as any human patient might show a doctor where it hurt. Rajesh could barely believe what he was witnessing, and he was intensely grateful that the clinic's security camera would be recording this entire interaction, because otherwise no one would ever believe his account of what was happening. He continued, speaking softly, making eye contact briefly, then looking away to avoid seeming challenging, and he began to inch forward on his seat, moving so slowly that it took nearly 10 minutes to cover the 5 meters between them. Every movement telegraphed and non-threatening, giving the leopard every opportunity to change her mind and flee or attack, whichever her instinct dictated. When he was finally close enough to examine the injured leg, close enough that he could smell the musky scent of the leopard and see the individual whiskers on her face and count the spots in her rosettes, Rajesh gently reached out his hand, moving with the kind of slow deliberation he might use approaching a frightened domestic cat, though this was decidedly not a creature that could be considered domestic in any sense. The leopard watched his hand approach, her muscles tensed and ready, but she didn't pull away, didn't growl or show her teeth. And when his fingers finally made contact with the soft fur of her injured leg, she actually closed her eyes briefly in what seemed like relief that help had finally arrived. Rajesh carefully palpated the leg, his skilled hands feeling for breaks, dislocations, or signs of infection, and what he discovered was both better and worse than he had feared. The leg wasn't broken, which was good, but she had a deep gash that had become infected, the tissue around it hot and swollen, and the infection was serious enough that without treatment it could easily spread and become life-threatening, and in her current condition, heavily pregnant and unable to hunt properly, she was in grave danger, as were the unborn cubs she carried. If you're watching this and you're as amazed as I am by what you're hearing, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and turned on notifications, because stories like this are exactly what I share on this channel. True accounts of the incredible connections that can form between humans and wild animals. Reminders of why conservation matters and why we need to protect these magnificent creatures and their habitats. And don't forget to like this video and share it with everyone you know, because this story deserves to be heard. It's a testament to the intelligence and emotional depth of animals that we often underestimate, and it shows us that trust and compassion can bridge even the widest gaps between species. Now let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story gets even more incredible. Rajesh knew he faced an impossible decision. The leopard needed immediate medical treatment. She needed the infection cleaned and drained, antibiotics administered, possibly stitches to close the wound properly, and she needed this done quickly before the infection spread further, or before she went into labor in her weakened condition. But all of these procedures would require sedation, and sedating a heavily pregnant wild leopard was extraordinarily dangerous. The drugs could affect the unborn. Cubs could trigger premature labor, could cause any number of complications that might result in the death of both mother and babies. Yet doing nothing would almost certainly result in the same outcome. The leopard would die of infection or starvation within days, and her cubs would die with her. As Rajesh weighed these options, maintaining his gentle contact with the leopard's injured leg, speaking softly to her in a continuous murmur of reassurance, he made a decision that would later be hotly debated in wildlife veterinary journals and conference presentations around the world. He would treat her, but he would do it without full sedation, using only local anesthetic and relying on the incredible trust this leopard was demonstrating to keep her calm and cooperative during the procedure. Rajesh called out instructions to Priya, who was still pressed against the wall but watching everything with wide eyes, and she carefully, moving as slowly and deliberately as Rajesh had, brought him his medical kit, antibiotics, bandages, and local anesthetic. The process of cleaning and treating the infected wound while the leopard remained conscious was one of the most terrifying and awe-inspiring experiences of Rajesh's life. He worked with hands that wanted to shake but forced themselves to remain steady, cleaning away dead tissue, draining the infection, irrigating the wound with antiseptic solution, while the leopard lay still, occasionally flinching or making soft sounds of discomfort but never pulling away, never showing aggression, maintaining that extraordinary trust even as Rajesh performed procedures that must have been painful despite the local anesthetic. He administered a dose of antibiotics appropriate for her weight, then carefully bandaged the wound, wrapping it in a way that would protect it but could be easily removed by the leopard herself once it had healed sufficiently. The entire procedure took nearly 2 hours, and by the end of it Rajesh was drenched in sweat from the heat, the physical effort, and the sustained adrenaline of working in such close proximity to an apex predator who could end his life with one swipe of her powerful paw. When he finally finished and sat back, the leopard remained lying down for several more minutes as if processing what had just happened or simply resting after the ordeal. Then she slowly stood up, testing the injured leg which, while still sore, was clearly already feeling better now that the pressure of the infection had been relieved and medication was beginning to work. She looked at Rajesh one more time, that same direct golden gaze that seemed to convey recognition and gratitude, though he knew that attributing such human emotions to a wild animal was scientifically questionable, even as his heart insisted that's exactly what he was seeing. And then she turned and began to walk toward the gate of the compound, moving slowly but with more ease than when she had arrived. But she didn't leave. She walked to the gate, then stopped and looked back at Rajesh, then walked a few more steps toward the forest that bordered his clinic, then stopped and looked back again. The message was unmistakable. She wanted him to follow. Priya protested, said this was insane, that he had already taken enough risks for one day, that following a wild leopard into the forest was suicidal, but Rajesh felt that same pull of intuition that had guided him through the treatment. The sense that this leopard was communicating something important, and that he needed to honor the trust she had shown by continuing to trust in return. He grabbed a small pack with water, a flashlight, and a few basic supplies, told Priya to call the forest department and let them know what was happening in case he didn't return by nightfall, and then he followed the pregnant leopard into the forest, maintaining a respectful distance of about 15 meters, following her distinctive rosette-patterned form as she led him deeper into the wilderness of Ranthambore. The leopard led Rajesh through terrain that would have been almost impossible for him to navigate on his own, along narrow game trails invisible to human eyes, across a seasonal stream that was running low in the dry season, through areas of thick brush that she moved through with liquid grace while he struggled to keep up without making too much noise or losing sight of her. After about 45 minutes of this journey, she stopped at the base of a massive banyan tree, its aerial roots creating a complex maze of vertical trunks that had grown from branches that touched the ground. And she looked back at Rajesh one more time before disappearing into a space between two of the larger root trunks. He approached carefully, and when he peered into the space where she had gone, his breath caught for the second time that day, because there, in a den that she had created among the banyan roots, were 3 tiny leopard cubs, probably only about a week old based on their size, their eyes still closed, their spots not yet fully developed into the rosette patterns they would eventually wear. The mystery suddenly made complete sense to Rajesh. This leopard had given birth a week ago, but her injured leg had become infected in the days following, probably from a hunt that had gone wrong or a territorial dispute with another predator, and she had found herself in an impossible situation, unable to hunt properly to sustain the milk production needed to feed her cubs, unable to move them to a safer location if they were discovered by predators or male leopards who sometimes kill cubs to bring females back into breeding condition, unable to protect them adequately in her weakened state. Somehow, through some combination of previous observation of humans, desperation, and remarkable intelligence, she had remembered the clinic where she had probably seen other injured animals taken and successfully treated, and she had made the extraordinary decision to seek help, to trust a human with not just her own life but with knowledge of her cub's location, the most precious secret any mother animal can have. And now she was showing him her babies, letting him see them, perhaps wanting him to know that his help had given them a chance to survive, or perhaps simply unable to bear being separated from them any longer and needing him to understand the full situation. Rajesh sat at a respectful distance from the den entrance, watching as the leopard entered and her cubs immediately began mewing and crawling toward her, their tiny paws kneading at her belly as they sought to nurse, and he felt tears pricking at his eyes at the beauty and vulnerability of the scene before him. The mother leopard lay on her side, allowing her cubs to feed, and she looked out at Rajesh with an expression that he would never be able to adequately describe, but that communicated everything about motherhood, vulnerability, trust, and the fierce protective love that transcends species boundaries. He stayed there for perhaps 20 minutes, memorizing every detail of this moment that he knew was a once-in-a-lifetime gift, this glimpse into the intimate life of one of the world's most secretive and elusive big cats. And then he slowly stood and backed away, retracing his path back toward the clinic and leaving the leopard mother to care for her babies in peace. Confident now that with the infection treated and antibiotics in her system, she would recover her hunting ability and be able to sustain herself and her cubs through the critical early months of their lives. Over the following weeks, Rajesh saw the leopard several more times, always from a distance, always in circumstances that suggested she was deliberately allowing herself to be seen, letting him know that she and her cubs were still alive and doing well. Other forest staff and researchers who worked in the area began reporting sightings of her as well, and she became locally famous as the leopard who had trusted a human, with many park workers making special trips hoping to catch a glimpse of her and her growing cubs. Rajesh was careful never to approach too closely or to disturb her, and he made sure that others understood the importance of giving her space and not interpreting her unusual willingness to tolerate human presence as an invitation to approach or photograph her too aggressively. He worried that the attention might cause her to move her cubs to a new location, or worse, might condition her to be too trusting of humans in general, which could be dangerous in a world where not all humans had good intentions toward leopards. 3 months after that extraordinary July afternoon, Rajesh was doing his evening rounds when he noticed movement at the edge of his compound, and when he looked closely, there she was, the leopard mother, and beside her, still small but growing steadily, and showing the playful curiosity characteristic of young big cats, were her 3 cubs, 2 males and a female, as he could now see in the better light. The mother leopard made that same soft chuffing sound she had made on their first meeting, and the cubs, picking up on their mother's calm demeanor, didn't show the fear of humans that young leopards normally would. They stayed for perhaps 5 minutes, just at the edge of the forest, and then the mother led them away. But in those 5 minutes, Rajesh understood that he was being given another gift, the opportunity to see that his intervention had worked, that the cubs were healthy and strong and learning the skills they would need to survive in the wild, and that the mother leopard had wanted him to know this, had gone out of her way to show him the results of the trust she had placed in him. The story of the trusting leopard might have remained a local tale, shared among wildlife workers and perhaps written up in a professional journal, but in today's interconnected world, stories like this don't stay local for long. One of the Forest Department officials who had been monitoring the situation filmed the leopard's visit with her cubs to Rajesh's clinic, and that video, showing the magnificent spotted cat leading her babies to within meters of a human building, the cubs playing while their mother sat calmly watching both them and Rajesh, who stood respectfully at a distance, went viral online. Within days, it had been viewed millions of times, shared across social media, platforms with captions in dozens of languages, featured on news programs around the world, and sparked intense discussion about animal intelligence, conservation, human-wildlife relations, and the capacity of wild animals to form bonds with specific individual humans based on experience and need, rather than mere conditioning or habituation. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with people expressing wonder at the leopard's behavior and praising Rajesh for his courage and compassion. But there were also critics who argued that he had acted irresponsibly, that encouraging any kind of trust relationship between leopards and humans was dangerous, both for the animals and for people, that wild animals should remain wild, and that any breakdown of their natural fear of humans would inevitably lead to conflict and tragedy. Rajesh understood these concerns and shared them to some extent, and he was careful in interviews and social media posts to emphasize that what had happened was an extraordinary one-time situation driven by desperate circumstances, that he did not recommend anyone try to approach or interact with wild leopards, and that the best thing humans could do for these magnificent animals was to protect their habitat, reduce conflict by securing livestock, and appreciate them from a respectful distance. The last thing he wanted was for his story to inspire people to seek out dangerous interactions with wild predators in hopes of replicating his experience. Conservation organizations saw opportunity in the viral story, using it to highlight both the intelligence of leopards and the precarious situation they faced throughout their range due to habitat loss, human-wildlife conflict, and poaching. Ranthambore National Park, already famous as one of the best places in India to see tigers in the wild, gained additional recognition as a place where wildlife was protected well enough that even leopards, notoriously shy and difficult to observe, could occasionally reveal their hidden lives to careful observers. Tourism increased, bringing much-needed revenue to local communities and creating economic incentives for conservation that complemented the moral and ecological arguments that had always existed, but often failed to compete with the immediate needs of people struggling with poverty. If this story has inspired you or made you think differently about wildlife conservation and the intelligence of animals, I want you to do something for me. Right now, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, hit that like button to help this video reach more people who need to hear this message, and make sure you're subscribed to this channel with notifications turned on, because I regularly share stories like this that celebrate the natural world and remind us why protecting it matters so much for future generations. As months turned into years, Rajesh continued to occasionally see the leopard mother, and less frequently as they matured and dispersed, her now adult offspring. The mother herself became something of a legend in the park, identified by researchers and guides by her distinctive rosette patterns and by the prominent scar on her left front leg where Rajesh had treated her infection. She successfully raised 2 more litters of cubs in the years that followed, apparently suffering no lasting effects from her injury, and demonstrating the remarkable resilience that allows leopards to survive in landscapes as varied as rainforests, mountains, savannas, and even the edges of major cities. She never again approached Rajesh's clinic or sought human help, suggesting that her original behavior had indeed been born of extraordinary circumstances rather than a general shift in her perception of humans. But researchers noted that she showed less fear of ranger vehicles and monitoring equipment than other leopards in the park. And she once was observed with cubs at a waterhole while park staff were present at fairly close range, behavior that suggested she could discriminate between specific humans or human contexts, and had perhaps learned that not all human presence was threatening. The 3 cubs from that first litter all survived to adulthood, a remarkable success rate for leopards where cub mortality often exceeds 50% due to predation, starvation, disease, and human conflict. The female established her territory overlapping partly with her mother's range, as is common for female leopards who often maintain some connection to maternal territories, while the 2 males dispersed further, one moving into an adjacent section of the park and the other reportedly leaving the protected area entirely and taking up residence in a hilly region where he occasionally came into conflict with villagers. Though Rajesh worked with local communities to implement protective measures for livestock that allowed the leopard and humans to coexist without major incident. Genetic sampling conducted by researchers confirmed that all 3 cubs went on to reproduce successfully, meaning that Rajesh's intervention had not only saved 4 leopard lives directly, but had contributed to the genetic diversity and population stability of the species in the region. The story took on additional significance when a long-term study of leopard behavior in Ranthambore, using camera traps, GPS collars, and direct observation, revealed something that surprised even experienced researchers. The mother, leopard's daughter, when she had her first litter of cubs and one of them developed what appeared to be a leg injury, brought the cub to within 100 meters of Rajesh's clinic, close enough to be clearly visible but not approaching directly, and remained in that area for several days until the cub's condition improved on its own. It was impossible to prove, but researchers speculated that some kind of cultural transmission had occurred, that the mother had somehow communicated to her daughter that this specific location and the specific human associated with it represented a potential source of help in times of crisis. This observation, if correctly interpreted, suggested that leopards possessed not just intelligence, but culture, in the sense that information learned through experience could be passed between generations, an ability previously documented primarily in more social species, like elephants, whales, and primates, but rarely in solitary carnivores. Rajesh's clinic became a pilgrimage site of sorts for wildlife enthusiasts and researchers from around the world, people who wanted to see the place where this extraordinary interaction had occurred and perhaps catch a glimpse of the famous leopard or her descendants. He was offered positions at more prestigious institutions, larger facilities with better equipment and funding, but he chose to stay at his small clinic on the edge of Ranthambore, feeling that his work there had purpose and meaning that transcended professional advancement. He established a foundation using some of the speaking fees and donations that came from his newfound fame, funding programs to reduce human-wildlife conflict, providing compensation to villagers who lost livestock to predators so they wouldn't feel compelled to retaliate against leopards or tigers, and supporting education initiatives that taught young people in local communities about the ecological importance of predators and the practical ways to coexist with them safely. The scientific papers that came out of the incident and subsequent research were published in top-tier journals and sparked new directions in research on big cat cognition, problem-solving, and social learning. Rajesh co-authored several of these papers, combining his veterinary expertise with behavioral and ecological data collected by other researchers, and he became a sought-after speaker at conservation conferences, where his talk about the leopard who trusted was always standing room only, moving audiences to tears and inspiring renewed commitment to wildlife protection efforts. He never claimed to fully understand why the leopard had chosen to trust him, acknowledging that there were likely factors of individual personality, previous experiences with humans, desperation born of maternal instinct, and perhaps pure chance that all came together in that extraordinary moment. but he remained convinced that animals possessed far greater cognitive and emotional depth than most people recognized, and that respecting and protecting that depth was not just morally right, but essential for the future of both wildlife and humanity. 10 years after that sweltering July afternoon, Rajesh was in his courtyard treating a young chital deer with an arrow wound, likely from a poacher's attempt that had failed to kill the animal immediately, when he heard a familiar sound, that same soft chuffing vocalization that he had heard only once before in his life, but that had been seared into his memory. He looked up, and there at the edge of the courtyard, now older with more gray in her muzzle and moving with the slight stiffness of age, was the leopard, and she was not alone. Beside her was a younger female, probably one of her daughters or granddaughters, and the younger leopard had an obvious injury, a deep gash across her shoulder that looked like it had come from a territorial fight with another predator. The message was clear. The original leopard had not come for herself this time, but had brought a family member who needed help, demonstrating not just memory and trust that had persisted for a decade, but an ability to recognize that what had worked for her might work for another, a level of abstract reasoning and social teaching that left Rajesh momentarily speechless. He treated the younger leopard that day, using the same careful approach, the same patient earning of trust. And while it was not quite the same as that first miraculous encounter, because he now knew it was possible rather than witnessing the impossible, it was in some ways even more profound, because it showed that the bond formed between one wild leopard and one human had rippled out across time and generations, creating a legacy of trust and mutual respect that continued to shape the relationship between these magnificent predators and at least one member of the species that was simultaneously their greatest threat and potentially their greatest hope for survival in an increasingly human-dominated world. The old leopard watched the treatment of her companion from a short distance, that same golden gaze that Rajesh remembered so well, and when it was done, and the younger leopard had been given antibiotics and her wound cleaned and bandaged, the two big cats left together, disappearing into the forest as silently as they had come. Rajesh never saw the original leopard again after that day, and 6 months later, park rangers found her body in a remote section of the forest, curled up in a natural cave as if sleeping, dead from what appeared to be natural causes at an age that was quite old for a wild leopard. They contacted Rajesh immediately, and he traveled to the site to see her one final time. This remarkable individual who had changed his life and through him had touched millions of people around the world. He arranged for a proper burial in the forest she had called home, marked with a simple stone that read, "Here lies a leopard who trusted, and, in trusting, taught us about the depths of intelligence and emotion that exist in minds very different from our own." The death was noted in wildlife journals and reported in news media, with tributes pouring in from people across the globe who had been moved by her story, who had watched the viral videos of her bringing her cubs to show Rajesh, who had found in her tale a reminder of the connections that are possible between humans and nature when both approach with respect and compassion. This story, this absolutely true account that has been documented in scientific literature, captured on video, and witnessed by numerous reliable observers, reminds us of several profound truths that are easy to forget in our increasingly urbanized and technologically mediated world. It reminds us that wild animals are not simply instinct-driven automatons responding mechanically to stimuli, but individuals with preferences, memories, the capacity to learn and to teach, and emotional lives that we are only beginning to understand and appreciate. It reminds us that trust can bridge seemingly insurmountable divides, that acts of compassion reverberate in ways we cannot predict or control, and that sometimes taking a risk to help another being, even when that being is very different from ourselves, can create bonds and outcomes that enrich everyone involved. Most importantly, it reminds us that in a world where human expansion continues to shrink wild spaces, and where wildlife populations face increasing pressures from habitat loss, climate change, and direct persecution, there are still opportunities for positive coexistence, still reasons for hope that we can find ways to share this planet that allow both human communities and wildlife to thrive. Before I close, I want you to take a moment to think about what this story means, and how you can be part of protecting animals like this remarkable leopard. Whether it's supporting conservation organizations working to protect big cat habitat, making choices in your daily life that reduce your environmental impact, educating yourself and others about wildlife and conservation issues, or simply taking the time to appreciate the natural world and instilling that appreciation in the next generation, every action matters. But right now, what I really want you to do is leave a comment sharing what this story meant to you. Give this video a like to help it reach more people who need to hear this message of hope and connection. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel with notifications turned on because I share stories like this regularly, and you don't want to miss them. And share this video with your friends, family, and social networks because stories like this deserve to be spread far and wide. They change how people think about wildlife and conservation, and that change in thinking is the first step toward creating a world where humans and animals can truly coexist in mutual respect and benefit. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring, and remember that trust and compassion can change the world, one interaction at a time.